When I started at Santa Fe in 2004, I took over a floundering biotechnology program. It had 4 students. I walked into the lab, half the equipment was broken, we were in a very small space. It was a lot of work. I had recently been pretty ill. I left the University of Florida. I was a research associate. I have 2 patents, technology that was licensed at the University of Florida. My background, I'm a pharmacologist. I guess by trade, I always say I'm a medical technologist. I grew up in clinical labs at Shands Hospital, and then went to do my graduate work. So I've done a little bit of microbiology, a little bit of hematology, a little bit of blood banking. I've done pharmacology and women's health research. My patents are in estrogens as treatments for neurodegenerative diseases. My postdocs, I did large animal surgery and looking at preterm labor issues in women and trying to come up with some drugs to treat preterm labor. It's a pretty tricky subject, actually. And then I got sick. And then I applied for a job to teach because I could no longer do the science, and landed at Santa Fe with the opportunity to really put my energy into a program that was floundering was really the thing I needed. It would be the equivalent to blowing out your knee in the bowl game. I really needed to jump into something that needed some energy, and so I took over the biotech program. I've been there since 2004. We opened the Perry Center. The picture here that I have for you is the Perry Center. It's the Charles R. and Nancy V. Perry Center for Emerging Technologies. We opened it in Alachua, across the street from Progress Park. We now have 3 programs at the Perry Center that are anchored in biotechnology. We have the clinical lab science program, the biotech program, and the biomedical engineering program. And I'm happy to say we have 152 program students today. So growing science programs and not really science colleges, right? So the Florida college system is different from the state university system. We do the remediation. We provide the access for people. And so I have some different thoughts on this because what I just didn't tell you about myself is that I grew up poor. I grew up situationally poor. I went to one of the worst high schools in the state. It is in one of the scarier hoods that you'd have the opportunity to walk in. I took 2 credits of science and washed my hands of it and swore I would never do it again. It wasn't until a family member got ill. I was at the University of Florida because a friend and I sat on the phone and said, what are we going to do with ourselves? We don't know. And so we went to the University of Florida, so I'm sure not a background that most of the rest of the audience here shares. So I graduated the first time in Florida, trying to put myself through school. Ronald Reagan was the president, and he cut literally every opportunity I had to try to put myself through school. I worked 3 jobs to get through my undergraduate degree. I was a single, unmarried, pregnant woman when Jeb Bush got on television and said single women should get off welfare and find a job. So I'm going to provide for you a little bit different perspective, I hope, about some of the things that we can do to drive science education for not just the people who are slated for science, but for all of the people, because we need, in this day and age, a society that's technologically educated. Right? Policy that's being made every day by people who don't understand it. Health policy, energy renewal policy, all of this is being made and voted on by people who don't understand it. And we need everybody to understand it. So hopefully you'll see where I'm coming from. The reason why I believe science education is important for all of those other reasons, we actually teach a class at Santa Fe that actually talks about stem cells and what they are, and cloning and what it is, and genetically modified agricultural crops and what they are. And so I'm not trying to drive anybody's opinion, but I want to educate them about the material so that they can form their own. Right? So science education is important. Actually, science STEM occupations are on the rise. There are some pretty strict definitions about what these occupations are. This is a Department of Commerce report that you can go to this website and actually download the report. 17% projected growth over the next 5 to 10 years, let's say. And also there seems to be some sort of protection from unemployment. So when the rest of the occupations are experiencing 10% unemployment, the STEM occupations are actually only experiencing about 5% unemployment. That's why we care, right? So what we want to do, and you've heard a lot of this in the news, are drive students to go to science. Well, the students who like science, the geek ones, if you will, they're going to go to science no matter what you're talking about. But we need to get the rest of them to consider science. But we have some reservations on how ready they are for science education and college education in general. And I've heard some folks talking about this, so let me show you some numbers about where nationally we are and where the state of Florida is in regard to science education. So the reason I'm using the ACT is because the SAT doesn't provide any information for science. It's English and math and writing. There's some logic, but there's really no science topic exam. But the ACT actually has 4 subject matter exams. And so there's English, reading, math, and science. The scale is 1 to 36, 1 being the lowest and 36 being the highest. And then the national average composite score is somewhere around 21.1, right? The total number of students nationally taking the exam is 1.6 million. The number of students in Florida's cohort in 2011 was 117,575, which represents 66% of the high school seniors in the state of Florida. Right? Now, the nice thing about the ACT is they have what we call benchmark scores. And so what this means is if a student hits one of these scores in their subject area, that they have a 50% chance of obtaining a B or higher, or a 75% chance of obtaining a C or higher in that corresponding college course. And so if we can make the matches, English composition is the English test, algebra would be the math test, social sciences would be comparable to the reading test, and then biology, college biology would be comparable for the science topic exam, right? And so those benchmark scores, it's kind of interesting that they actually go up as you get to science. But those benchmark scores then are indicated, and they've been doing this since 1990 as far as collecting this data goes, so it's pretty robust data about the benchmark score and what it predicts. Right? And so these are the percent of ACT tested high school grads that are actually meeting college readiness benchmarks. And so 65 to 70% over the course of the last 5 years in English making the college readiness benchmark. Right? As you come down from there, 53 or so percent of the students over the last 5 years hitting the college readiness mark in social science. 43% or so over the last 5 years hitting the college readiness mark for math. 20 to 30% of the students in science. And a student who is benchmark ready in all 4 subjects is only about a quarter of the number of students who are actually taking this exam. Right? Now this represents the 66% of the population in Florida that are actually going with the idea that they're going to college. There's still 34% of the population that has no interest in this at all, or doesn't see the need for it. So we're talking about, again, a skewed population, and still only 25% of those students are actually college ready, according to these measures. Now, so we look at that number 24. So how many students are really at 24? Let's say 1 or 2 points probably would make a huge difference. And it does. If you add, and this is 2009 data here for the national scale, but if you add 2 points to the benchmark score, then you're hitting somewhere about 40% of the population. And it actually sounds better to me, right? So we need to consider that. Within 2 points, 40% of the population probably ready to go in science. All right? So, and nationally I think that's great. But really, Santa Fe College serves Alachua and Bradford County. Okay? And so I've already extended that probably the students that I'm getting aren't the students who have taken the ACT, or I'm only getting a small percentage of them. Actually, if you look on the Florida College Report for the ACT, about 1,000 people indicated Santa Fe as one of their choices. So of the 117,000 people that took it, only 1,000 people are coming to Santa Fe. So we are getting a different population. Santa Fe has about 18,000 students. Okay? So the scary part about this is where Florida is in relation to the national average, right? So I want to point out over the last 10 years that the ACT Science National Average, somewhere around 21, which is already 3 points below the benchmark score for half the population. But in addition, if the national score ready for science is at 30%, the Florida score is really only at 20%. So 20% of that 117,000 students are actually ready in science. Right? And if you break those numbers even down even further by ethnicity, you will see that only 5% of the African American population in Florida can meet that benchmark score. And let me back up for just a second. And I put the distribution up because I'm a scientist and I like data. And I like to know within 2 points or so of the benchmark, I like to know, if everybody was at 22, I wouldn't be so worried about it. But what we have in Florida is a skewed population at the bottom end of the range. Right? And so this is, again, 2009 data. I'm kind of going back and forth between 2009 data and 2011 data. The numbers aren't that different for 2011 data. It's actually the same. So in 2009, it was 19% for science meeting the readiness score. In 2011, we're at 20. We, though, in 2011, there's only one state below us not meeting college readiness. There's only one state. We are 49th as far as where our graduates are testing to for science readiness. Anybody guess? The 50th state, Mississippi. Correspondingly, Washington State, at the other end of the world, 40% of their graduates are actually meeting college readiness benchmarks in science. Right? So here's what the post-secondary story is. But in Florida, we've got all of this testing for the FCAT, and so what's going on at the secondary level? Are we coming up with the same numbers, I guess, is the question. Right? And so what about the FCAT? The FCAT's been used in education since 1998, and I don't propose to be an expert on FCAT or FCAT statistics. I haven't really looked at much about this test, but I did go to a conference where they were discussing it, and there was a gentleman who was putting up questions from the FCAT, and this was one of the ones he put up. And so I don't know if I've got any scientists in the room, but the question was, the mass of a tree comes from, and the answers were air, soil, and water. And so just dare to be brave and put your arm up for which one you think it is. Anybody think air? Anybody for the A's? How about the B's? Soil? Okay, how about the C's? Water. Right? Me too. That's where I was. Do you know that the man said the answer to this question was air? Okay. So the idea was that they were extracting carbon from the carbon dioxide that the tree was utilizing, and that the majority of the tree was made up of carbon-based compounds, and so that the mass of the tree would come from the carbon. And I could agree with that logic, but that tree, the mass of it comes from the water. Right? The volume of it comes from the carbon, the mass of it comes from the water. And so as a scientist, I don't know that I could separate those out between air and water. I don't know that I could. But this is the kind of question that we're asking. Okay? And we're making it almost too keep it simple stupid. And so I saw him throw maybe 10 questions up. As a scientist, we love to argue. Scientists love to argue. I'm a scientist first and an educator second. So I can argue a circle saw about some scientific concept and walk out of there and be best friends with the person I had the argument with. I have learned that educators aren't so good at leaving the argument where it stands. But let me show you that if the FCAT started in 1998, there's some data over from 2005 in Florida, and that we actually are going down. We actually were better in 2005 than we are now. So maybe the FCAT's not doing anything for us. But in 2010 FCAT scores, and the reason I use the 2010 FCAT is because the students are taking it in 11th grade, and then in 12th grade in 2011, they're taking the ACT, and so we ought to be able to follow, theoretically, a cohort of students from the FCAT exam to the ACT exam. And in addition, they're taking that science FCAT at 5th grade and at 8th grade and 11th grade, and there are some startling things going on. The first thing is that they're actually decreasing in their science proficiency. Right? So in the 5th grade, they're 50% proficient, and in the 8th grade, they're 40-ish% proficient, and in the 11th grade, they're 38% proficient. Right? This number also holds well for 2008. So in 2008, the FCAT, 38% proficient. In 2010, the FCAT, 38% proficient. Right? So there's some good news about this. 12 districts in 2010 scored below 30% proficient. The good news was in 2009, 19 districts scored less than 30% proficient. So overall, the state is actually getting better. That's some good news. And in Alachua County, which is the counties we serve for Santa Fe, so it's always important to check that out. We serve Alachua and Bradford County, and the percent proficient in all 3 levels is about 42%, which is higher than most of the rest of the state. So we are doing a good job in Alachua County. That's always good to know. Bradford County is struggling a little bit more than us, but they're doing a pretty good job now. And there's Race to the Top initiatives, and we've done some things to change this up a little bit. So we're on the upswing. Here's the problem. There's a perception issue. So we're saying on the FCAT that 38% of the students are proficient, and yet the ACT is saying only half of those students actually are making a B or C in college. Yes, sir?
Yes, ma'am. I used to be a teacher here in County, and I used to teach science. And I used to hear a lot of teachers badmouth the FCAT and stuff like that. But my opinion is, if you look at the Sunshine State standards, maybe that is where the problem is. Because if you look at the Sunshine State standards, they don't actually get specific about the task.
Well, and let's save that for the end, okay. because I would buy into some of that. I have some other considerations. So we're really only, so there's a perception issue, clearly. Like the secondary institutions are getting some information, the post-secondary institutions are getting different information. We're not on the same playing field. And in fact, they've looked at some of that stuff, the ACT has, and what the ACT, one of the things that they say in their new curriculum report is that how a student does in 8th grade is actually more indicative of how they're going to do in college. Because there are some ACT exams that they give at 8th grade and 10th grade going on. That in 8th grade, there's actually more indicative of how a student's going to do in college than actually what they do in high school. So that's interesting. There's been some work at the state level with the STEM Florida Business Report. And so they looked at, and if you go to this website, you can look at the state's report card in some of these areas, and you can see where they say the state is. I was having a hard time pulling up some of the assumptions that they were making and collecting their data, so I didn't necessarily pull the data up here. But they do have a business report that I was at a conference a couple years ago. They were showing their data and what they decided needed to happen for STEM to be better in Florida. And so they cited these 4 areas. They said that if we could increase public awareness about STEM, then we would more likely get students excited about science. And there might be some issues with teacher quality. I heard him say, because I wrote it down, that only 19% of the teachers actually teaching science actually were credentialed in science, and that most of the teachers teaching science actually got their, an alternative credentialing mechanism to be able to teach in science. And so I can see not having a science background might make teaching science more difficult. It might make you more resistant to student questions, because you wouldn't always know the answer, and in teaching we don't like to look stupid when we stand in front of the room. So I cannot find those numbers anywhere where it says that only 19%, I can't find that number. So that really is, at this point, urban legend for me, until I can actually find the data and where they got that information from. That there are some issues with education resources, that funding and equipment and science, and if the volume of science knowledge is doubling every 5 years, we're at a pretty quick pace for adding new knowledge. That the education resources need to keep up in order for us to stay ahead, and the question is, are they keeping up? And then they cited some problems with the FCAT I don't really care to argue the FCAT one way or the other, except to use it as an instrument for showing that our perceptions are off in some capacity. Right? So those are the things the state of Florida thinks. Now, here's where we get to the part where the things that I can do based on that program, and really some of the things that I think need to happen. So rigorous STEM program review. So again, teacher quality. So let's look at our science programs and let's see how the teachers are viewing it, the students are viewing it, how the grades are going. For me, at Santa Fe, because we're getting the other end of the population, we're getting a bunch of students that aren't prepared in science. Our teachers all will say that out loud. So the question is, how do we get them prepared without hating it? Right? Because really at this point, it's trial by fire. You go into class and you either sink or swim. And if you sink, then you're more likely to go into another occupation or another field or another major. Right? So we are forming a STEM advisory committee. That's one of the initiatives that the institution has this year, and we're going to put people from different faculty disciplines onto the committee, and we're going to ask some of the tough questions. We're going to hold some focus groups with students to get their perception of science and why they hate it and why they like it, and we're going to ask the faculty too, because again, some of the things I think are the workload isn't equitable, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that at the end. And then what we need to do is evaluate the potential for new STEM programs to see what can we do to add programs that would increase the number of students that are excited about STEM, right? As a public awareness campaign, we at the Perry Center have taken on doing what we call a summer science boot camp. So we run every summer for the last 2 summers, and we will continue to do it. And I've been pretty good at getting funding for the Perry Center, so this hasn't been a problem. We want rising 9th graders, 8th graders and 9th graders to come to the Perry Center and spend a week with the scientists and the faculty members that we have that work at the center, and we give them a week of what we call relevant science. And so we've taken the idea that we would do earth, wind, fire, and water to give them some environmental awareness and trying to hit all of the STEM subjects so they could see what it would be like maybe to work in one of those subjects and see what we do at Santa Fe so that we could bring them into Santa Fe. They would be aware of the programs that we have at the center. And so those have gone pretty well. I get parent comments like, my kid learned more science in a week with you guys than they learned in the whole time that they were in school. I don't think that they didn't learn anything in school. I just think we really just made the science relevant for them, and we let them put their hands on it. So there are some of those perceptions out there. But we do this summer science camp, and we will continue to do it until there's no way I can fund it, and I can't imagine that ever being a problem. All right? We're also trying to expose high school students to Santa Fe and to Santa Fe science programs. And so I do this. I have a connection with Santa Fe High School. We want them to bring all of their 11th grade students into the Perry Center and take the college readiness test. We want the students to get online, take that test, and see if they really are college ready. Lots of times I've decided that this new generation of students, they lack self-awareness in a way that I think is generated by all of the electronic connections that they make. So if you say something nasty to me and you see my face go like crestfallen because I can't believe you hurt my feelings, then you're going to recognize that that's hurtful and maybe not be so inclined to do it. But if you're online with someone and you say something nasty and you don't have that feedback of, oh my gosh, I can't believe they said that to me and your feelings are hurt, then I think that they just start to think that stuff's okay. And similarly, if they aren't getting any feedback about where they actually are ready for college in 11th grade, then they don't really have time to fix it. By the time they're taking ACTs and getting bad scores, that's too late. We need them to know in 11th grade that if they need to fix it, they still have an opportunity in high school in 12th grade to get serious about studying if they really want to come to college. So we've tested, I want to say, 150 of their students over the last 2 years. And so there's some legislation out there now kind of mandating that stuff, so I expect we'll do more of it. I work with, there is a group called Innovation Gainesville, where we're really tapping into the innovation community. There is the Innovation Gainesville is a large initiative community-wide promoting entrepreneurship in the area, spin-offs from the university, and so there are entrepreneurship academies and those kinds of things. And there is a talent development committee that I sit on and offer a perspective on. And then we work with a number of high school career academies. And so I'm disappointed that Dr. Delaney left because in the Jacksonville area, there is I think it's St. Johns County. I'm not exactly sure which school superintendent it is, but he's got a career academy in every one of his high schools, and he sends a certain percentage of his high school students through a career academy. I think the thing about the career academies that makes them so successful is the relevance of the material that they're learning. I think we're missing the boat if we're trying to cram more theoretical subjects into a time frame when the students are more concrete in their learning style, that we're missing the boat on actually getting them involved in things because we've given it to them the wrong way. And so I think the career academies, most people associate these with like vocational education fields, and I think we need to turn that around, because what we're finding is as we get more technologically advanced as a society, these vocational careers are very academically challenging. And if the biotech programs and the genetic things that my students do and the biomed programs and all the instrumentation and electronics that they fix, like those are perfect areas for people who need some relevance to the education. And then I have a lot of students who decide to go on to school because they understand what it is they're learning after they do that relevant step. So I think that we need to start to reframe some of those things. So we are involved in these public awareness campaigns at Santa Fe. So here we go. So this is actually I have a family relative who does genealogy. If I were going to describe my growing up in my family, we were situationally poor. My father died when I was very young, and so that created a set of circumstances that for an uneducated woman in 1970, it was difficult for her to find a job and support a family. She blew all the money. She didn't realize what she was doing. And so, but I have pretty great roots. The Gridleys, Fire and Ready Gridley, this was the commander who was on the deck of I can't even remember, the USS something, when the admiral said, "You may fire when ready, Gridley." So I like to use that line. So here I go. So the perception problem, whatever that is, I'm hoping that we can bring out some conversation to try to figure out how to change whatever this perception problem is. Maybe it's just admitting we're all not doing a good job. We're doing the best we can, but we just have to admit that we aren't using the test instruments the way they're intended to be used. We're teaching to tests. All right? Test instruments are designed to really capture how much knowledge you know, and I obviously can't tell you everything that you need to know to be successful in clinical microbiology, and I can only give a 100-question test. Right? So there's 1,000 things they need to know. I'm giving them 100. If I only tell them the 100 things they need to know, I've already dumbed down the material. Right? And if they get an 80 then they've walked away with 80% of the 100 and not 80% of the 1,000. So what we have to do is give up teaching the test, because that negates the relevance of the testing instruments and the scores that we use. Right? That's my personal opinion. We can agree openly or disagree openly. But that perception problem, that's part of the issue. I think educators aren't doing a good job of legislating to themselves, and so then the rest of the people are feeling like they have to legislate what we need to do but they don't really understand some of our issues. If we did a better job of legislating ourselves, we wouldn't have some of these things going on. Right? So we own some of that personal responsibility. One of the things we have to do between the middle schools and the high schools and the post-secondary schools is decide what it is we want them to know when they get to us. And so, again, I think there's a big perception difference. We still all have to come into a room and agree to maybe disagree sometimes and not take it personally when we have those conversations. But we have to decide what it is important that they come in with and then make sure they get it somehow. I personally think there's a workload inequity in science, and I have the science fair up here, so I'll get to some thoughts about that particular topic. But if I give you an example, I teach courses, there's 40 different courses in the area that I'm in charge of, and I personally have taught probably 18 of them. Okay? I yesterday taught courses in urinalysis and had students on microscopes looking at crystals that would indicate what drugs you took and what kidney function was like. I changed gears and went into fungal skin infections and how to identify fungus. I changed gears and tried to write this thing, and I changed gears and worked on some, there's some folks across the street writing a contract, and they wanted to know some stuff about biosafety for vaccine manufacturing. That's all the things I did yesterday, right? But I've got 8 or 9 instruments. They all have their own software package. And if I'm going to do a lab for the students, it doesn't come canned from the publisher. I actually have to develop that exercise. I have to keep that instrument working. Imagine for just a second that every time Microsoft changes their software package, that I have to deal with that 8 times. Right? And I use those instruments once a year, all that software. People are wondering why I just can't keep it all straight anymore. Right? So there is a workload inequity in science. If I bring that down to the middle school area, there's a teacher that teaches 6th grade science, a teacher that teaches 7th grade science, and a teacher that teaches 8th grade science. And each one of those individuals is responsible for 100 probably science fair projects that they individually have to read all the paperwork, get the forms back from the parents, help guide the student in what needs to do. They have to judge it, they have to talk about it, they have to teach them the concepts. That's a lot of extra work. That doesn't happen. I'd like to know a comparable exercise that has to happen in English and math and social studies. And so if there was a comparable exercise in any of those subject areas that was in addition to their teaching load, then somebody needs to make me aware. And I will say that I have upset a number of people, a number of administrators, trying to get this point across to them that my 15 credit hour load for my contract, if I'm a faculty member, if I have a lab for every class that I teach, that's an extra almost 14 hours that I'm in contact with the students during the course of a day that some other faculty member in a science or a subject that doesn't have labs doesn't have to do. Right? And in addition, the equipment has to work, and I have to be able to school the students on all of the software differences. And so I perceive personally a workload inequity that I don't see at the university level. I think people are pretty aware that the English professors and the medical school professors aren't getting paid the same thing. Right? But in the secondary level and in the middle schools and in the elementary levels, those people are all getting the same thing, even though I don't feel like the workload's distributed evenly. So we need to work on our workload distribution. We need to work on the statistics that we use to generate funding for programs because all of our stuff is based on FTE. And if the students in my classes are sitting there 2.5 times longer than the students in the other classes, I'm not going to generate any FTE. And if I'm going to be a successful administrator, I have to figure out how to turn those seats over quickly. And English classes are quite frankly cheaper to run, and I get more FTE. So there's a workload inequity. The system's not analyzing it. I'm not high enough up yet in the administration chain to be able to figure out where the issues are. But there's something that needs to be evaluated so that we're making decisions on workload so that we can keep the people who like to teach science teaching science and not upsetting them. I will say that I did find some papers that talked about the number of people who are leaving science and math professions, and it's 5 or 8% higher, depending on who you read, than the other secondary and middle and high school teaching disciplines. So there's a reason why it's higher. And then my last issue is the science fair. And I love the science fair. I love research. I really embrace this. I prefer we do it when the kids can actually understand what they're doing and not make it a parent exercise.